Hey, how's it going, YouTube? How y'all doing today? I got a bit of a breeze this morning. I got some wind. It's supposed to be cooling down tomorrow, so that's also good for these cattle because I'll be hauling them to market tomorrow. This one right here, this one right here, that one over there, then that one over there. Those 4 red ones are going to market tomorrow. They look pretty good. I would think that their weight is going to come in at around 800. Maybe a little bit higher, but somewhere about 800 to 850 is what I'm anticipating their weights come in at. They're good looking, and they yeah, I'll be getting good money on them tomorrow. I'll be getting good money on them. They don't have any horns or anything. Don't have any horns. Good looking feeder cattle. So yesterday I was taking a look through my budget because I got to get this thing figured out. So in all reality, if I make about $120,000 this year, I don't need to invest $120,000 to write off a majority of my taxes. If I even write off $100,000 worth of taxes, I'm doing very well, because if I write off $100,000, I go from owing the government about $40,000-$50,000 in taxes. If I make 120, I'll have to pay the government somewhere between $40,000 to $50,000 in taxes. But if I reduce my income to $20,000 through investment, through $100,000 by having $100,000 in investments, having $20,000 of income, of taxable income, turns it into me paying about $2,000 of taxes. So I go from owing about $40,000-$50,000 to owing $2,000, and so it's a net savings of about it's a net savings of almost 100%, of about $40,000-$50,000. So I was taking a look through my investment strategy and what I'm going to be doing before the end of the year. And when I look at these I decided that I'm going to skip the F250 and I'm going to go straight for an F350. Because my big thing is that next year, even if I have half of the results that I did this year, so I just said, you know, let's just say things only go half as good next year, I'll still be pulling in about $500,000 in the cattle business, and I'll have a net profit margin of about 20%. So I need to invest I need to invest everything that I make and then some if I want to write off my taxes. So I'm gonna have to end up investing almost $600,000 next year, or I'm gonna owe the government about or about half of that in taxes. I mean, if I'm not careful, I could end up owing like $100,000 in taxes. But I mean, okay, but that's not how it's going to turn out. But here's why. Because I'm not going to invest just one time next year. Like these cattle right here, I invested one time and I held them for a year, right? But I'm not going to do that next time. Because if I do that next year, I could end up owing a severe amount of money. I could end up owing the government like $350,000 in taxes, or like $275,000 in taxes. If I do what I did this year, next year I could end up owing a lot of money. And so my investment strategy for next year is that I am going to separate my investments into 4 major investments for the year. So instead of making one investment throughout the year, I am going to make 4 investments. And so I'm going to split my investments into four investments. I'm going to bring in 4 lot of cattle essentially. And because, okay, yeah, but that four. So what I am planning as of right now is that by separating my investments into 4 investments next year, instead of running one large set of investments, is that if I run 4 set of investments, I can hold the capital that I generate from my farm this year. I can hold on to the capital, and then when I sell the first lot of cattle next year, if something goes horribly wrong, like let's say, okay, because here's the reality of the situation. Let's say I invest $150,000, right? But I invest $150,000 into a number 1 graded animal, and I invest $150,000 into number 1 graded animals. Let's say I have a catastrophe. I have a horrible catastrophe, and I end up losing about $10,000, right? I end up after everything is said and done, I actually end up losing $10,000. Well, I can hold on to the capital that I make this year to cover that, should that happen. There are people, I'm not saying that if somebody invests $120,000 into the cattle business that their maximum loss outcome is $10,000. But I'm just saying, for me, when I look at the information that I have collected throughout the last year, when I collect information, I collect information like I collect as much information as I can. Because the thing about collecting data, about collecting information, is that at times like this, it becomes very important. Like when I'm looking into creating a budget for my next year and I have to do something like invest $600,000, that's when the information becomes very important. And so collecting data rigorously is extremely important. Because if I had the same, let's say I had exactly what happened this year happen next year, and let's say it happened, but let's say it was even worse. Let's say I lost half of my animals, but I doubled their weight. Let's say I brought in $150,000 worth of cattle, and I lost half of them, but the half that were left over, I doubled their weight, and then I took them to market. And then when I look at the market spreads right now, there is a premium for 5.5 weight cattle, and there's a discount for cattle that are about 2.5 weight. So if I double their weight from a 2.5 to a 5.5, I'll get about a 10-cent premium, roughly a 10-cent premium. And so if I double their weight and I lose half of my animals, I'm realistically at a loss capacity of about $10,000 for investing 150 grand. But that's also why I am spreading my investments across 4 major investments next year instead of doing one singular major investment. Because if I do one singular major investment and I make a tremendous, and let's say I make like $600,000, right? If I make $600,000 in one singular investment, I will have to invest that $600,000, or I will owe the government about $300,000 in taxes, maybe even a little bit more. And so I'm going to split my investments up into 4 major investments. And when I split my investments up into major when I split my investments up into 4 major investments, that will give me, if my first set of investments do not go well, I can recover the losses from the first investment before I go on to the second one and the third one and the fourth one, etc. So the capital that I generate from the first set of investments will be what pay for the second set of investment. The third will pay for the fourth, the second will pay for the third, etc., etc. And the capital that I am generating right now, I will hold on to, so that I am able to cover any losses should they occur on my first set of investments next year. So the capital that I generate this year, I can hold on to that, and that literally puts me at near zero risk. Because when it comes to large sums of money, you got to be very, you got to start looking at the numbers very carefully. Because if you freak out and you run away or anything, or you throw a tantrum or anything like that, you're gonna mess it up. And like, because here's one good example. Like I remember, okay, so like here's one good example. Me, if I need to invest $60,000, right now, if I need to invest $60,000, when I look through my investment portfolio, that's $60,000. I can invest $60,000 right now with $200 a month. So if I invest $200 a month, I can invest $60,000. I can just go and swap out my truck. If I swap out my truck, it's going to cost me $200 a month. If I swap out my 150 for a 350, it's going to cost me about $200 a month, and I can get about $60,000 worth of investments off that $200 a month. And so it's just got to look at the numbers very carefully, because when the numbers get very large, like even this year, like if I'm going to make $120,000 a year, or if I'm going to significantly increase that, like next year, what will probably happen is that I'll probably end up needing to buy more land. Because I will be generating so much revenue from running cattle. It will be mind-boggling. Like if I separate my investments into 4 major investments, and I run cattle, but the cattle that I will be raising is that I will be running. I'm just going to need to kind of throw a large net. I will have cattle that I bring in that are unweaned, balling calves, that need to be weaned, that I will precondition myself. But I will also be looking for lots of cattle that have already been preconditioned #1 graded. So I'll be looking for #1 graded cattle that have been preconditioned at about that 3 weight category, about that 2.5 to 3 weight, maybe up to 3.5 weight category. But I will also be bringing in balling calves. So those are going to be the 2 major types of animals that I raise. I'm gonna raise number 1 animals, but I'm gonna raise them either unweaned and balling at 2.5 weight, or I'm going to raise them in lots that I bring in number 1 graded at about up to 3.5. And the market conditions right now is that I want to raise them to about a 5.5, and when I get them to a 5.5, chances are I'll get about a 10-cent premium on them. And so that's what, so when I look through the markets, the cattle markets right now, that's where the majority of the money is. And when I look at what I've done this year, I made such a tremendous amount of money on these animals. I mean, I made so much money on these animals that I will literally be able to cover all of the debts that I have on all of my equipment, including my truck. I'll be able to pay off my truck. I'll be able to pay off my grain drill. I'll be able to pay off everything, and I'll still have money left over. That is literally, I generated a boatload of money on these animals this year. I mean, it was incredible. I made a tremendous amount of money on these animals. And next year, even if I do half of that, I will be good to go. I mean, I'll need to buy more land next year. More than likely, I will need to go and buy more land. And if I buy more land, that gives me an opportunity to run more cattle. And if I have more land and more cattle, I generate more cash flow. And if I generate more cash flow, I need to invest more capital again. And the money becomes, I mean, I'm gonna have to, when I go to the bank this time, I'm gonna have to ask them for a loan for about $150,000. Because if I don't have a loan for $150,000 next year, when I am rotating through my investments, because I'll need to invest 4 times very heavily next year. If I want to separate my investments into 4 major categories, or not 4 major categories, but if I want to make 4 major investments next year to reduce my my risk, to reduce my exposure to risk, because if I make $600,000 in one go, it's going to put me at a large amount of risk. I'm going to need to, it is going to be a ballistic amount of risk. And so I would rather invest $150,000 4 times than invest $600,000. And so when I go to the bank this time, you know, this time around, I may only need to invest about $40,000-$50,000 into the cattle business, because I also got that about $70,000 that I'll be investing into an F350. But that $40,000 to $50,000, but next year when I sell those cattle and I generate a revenue, I'm going to need to invest almost like $100,000 immediately in January. And then if I sell those cattle for a profit, I'll need to invest like $150,000. And so the amount of money, the amount of capital that I need to invest goes absolutely astronomical, or the amount of income taxes that I need to pay go absolutely astronomical. And if I had to pay the government, let's say I had to pay the government even $50,000, like this year, if I just sat on my hands and I didn't do anything, I would owe the government like $50,000 in taxes, and I'm not gonna do that. Next year it could be like $250,000, and so I need to keep investing. And so when I look through my investment portfolio and I look through my investment strategy, that's what I've come up with. I'm going to separate my investments into 4 major investments next year instead of doing 1 major investment. And I'm going to invest in number 1 graded cattle, either 2.5 weight unweaned, balling, or I'm going to bring in 3.5 weight lots, uniform lots, preconditioned. So that's my big investment idea. And before the end of the year, I will be purchasing an F350. And when I purchase that F350 and I turn in my F150, it'll cost me about $200 a month, but I'll be able to invest about $70,000 worth of capital. So $70,000 cost me about $200 a month. And so that's just kind of like, like when going through an investment idea, don't freak out, okay? The numbers are gonna look huge and stuff, but you have to make good choices. I mean, just don't freak out and look at the numbers and make the right choice. But that's it for me today, YouTube. Y'all have a good one.